So anybody that's working remote now will be able to access this recording, and anybody that's here will be able to access the recording once I get it formatted up. Okay. So we're going to talk about a process called model space, paper space. And the commands we're going to be looking at, one's called tile mode, viewports, MView, MS, which stands for model space, PS, which stands for paper space. We're going to look at the zoom command. And the zoom has several options, but the one we'll be utilizing today is called the zoom XP option. Okay. Then we have the layer command, which we've used before. But layer is going to take on a totally now different function as we get into paper space, model space, which is kind of neat. And then you have the insert command, which I'm just going to briefly show you. That's why you're going to need that little part, that little title demo drawing, okay, to make this work fully. So let me get rid of this. Actually, I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move it out of the way so we don't see it, because I might want to come back to that. All right. So if we have a part like this, the old way of drawing in AutoCAD prior to this concept of paper space, model space, you didn't have paper space, just model space. So when you plotted, you know, if you're drawing full scale, you have to do a scale factor when you plot, like we've been doing. So everything we've been doing is kind of old style. Okay? So part of what drove this was the concept of three-dimensional drafting people. They would want to have a part in three or four views. They'd want to have like a top view and a side view and a whatever. You really couldn't do that in AutoCAD prior to this concept, okay? So they're kind of the ones that drove this. But one of the things you could do from the very beginning in AutoCAD was break your screen up into multiple screens, right? And so we're going to show you how to do this. If you just type in the word viewports, V-P-O-R-T-S, and hit enter, you'll get this dialog box that will pop up. And what this is asking you is what configuration of your screens do you want? Okay. So if we would break this up, let's say, into 3, and then there's one called right. Notice that configuration. You're going to have 2 little ones and 1 big one on the right-hand side. Okay. So we're going to do the 2 little ones and the 1. We're going to hit OK. And you should notice now that you have 3 screens, where before you had 1 screen. Okay? So these are called viewports. These are called tiled viewports, because notice they're like tile would be in your bathroom. They're rectangles that fit together. Okay? It's impossible to have a blank space, say, over here, or an irregular shaped viewport. Is everybody getting that to work? You might notice it's all the same model, okay? Because it's like you're just looking at one view, it's just different screens. Also, only one of these is active. But notice there's a blue line kind of around this border on mine. This is the active one. When I come over here, this one is inactive. You can tell my cursor is a crosshair here and it's a pointer here. If I want to make this guy active, you just click in it, makes him active. Click in it, you make him active. Everybody seen how that works? So if you click in one, you can zoom in, you can zoom out. So I can have a different zoom scale factor here, then say here, then say here. So I can have different views in terms of how this is working. Okay? Get the idea, guys? I'm going to do a zoom object here. Hold on a minute. So that's all good and well. The problem is that when you're working in this mode, because only one of these guys is active at a time, that means I can only print one of them. So here we go back to that same problem where three-dimensional drafting people, they want to print a top view, a side view, and a front view all on one sheet of paper. You can't do this. Even though it looks like that on the screen, only one of those screens is active. You guys get the idea? All right, so that's a bad thing. So here's another bad thing. Come up here to your layers dialog box. You should have 0, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. And click on layer 2. Well, actually, we'll just freeze layer 2. What happens when you freeze layer 2? It freezes it in every viewport. So when I froze layer 2, it's gone in every viewport. So the objects that were here, they're missing here, they're missing here. If I thaw it, it's back. If I freeze layer 1, everything's gone. So layers don't work very nicely with this because I might want to have layer 1 thawed in one viewport and frozen in another. I cannot do that with this process. Okay? I can't do it. So this is called tiled viewports, and we're working exclusively in what we call model space. If you notice down at the bottom of the screen, lower left-hand corner, there's a big tab there that says model. Everybody see that? All right. So after release 12, and due to the pressure from the 3D market, the programmers said, look, we got to do this differently. So they came up with this concept. They called it paper space versus model space. And when it came out, it got a really bad rap, being hard to use. You know, I never did think it was hard. I thought it was the best thing in the world. And you know, but there were a lot of people that were just used to doing it one way, and they don't want to change, right? So what happened though is, you know, it's kind of driven that way now. And so now basically what it's for is for you to be able to plot from paper space. You can still see your model, but you can plot everything 1-to-1. And the way we handle scale factors, we'll handle the scale factors in the viewports themselves. We're still drawing our model full scale, but we're going to handle it through the viewports. Okay, so we're going to do it a little differently. Okay, so what we're going to do is go back to a single viewport. So we're going to just type in the word viewports, hit enter. Yep. I must have spelled it wrong. There you go, viewports. Go to what's called a single viewport and hit OK. And you should be back in business. Okay? So you actually are in a viewport the whole time. You're just in a single viewport, where before we were in 3. You can break it up to a bunch of different viewports. So that's kind of cool. All right, so enter paper space. The paper space thing changed things up. When they did that, they had to create a couple of system variables. One is this guy called tile mode. This is called a system variable. When tile mode is turned on, you're in model space, single viewports. If you turn tile mode off, it'll flip you over into what we call paper space. Now they call it layouts. If you notice down below where it says layout 1, layout 2, don't click on them yet. But when you click on one of those, it actually turns tile mode off. Okay, and then it puts you into that paper space world. Okay. We have to have a new way of creating viewports. You can use this command to create viewports, the viewports command in paper space, but it's not very friendly. It's not very efficient. This command called mview is way better. It's a way better command. So we're going to look at that one. MS and PS, that stands for model space, paper space. That'll flip you back and forth between the two modes. Okay. I actually like to think of it as 2 different dimensions, because the model world is fully 3-dimensional and the paper space world is only 2-dimensional. Okay, so we'll see how that works here in a minute. To handle the scaling issue, you do it through the zoom, and that's what this XP is for. And I gave everybody a handout that says commonly used scale factors. Okay. You can also find this on my Blackboard site under week 6 as well. So if you lose this, you can download this anytime. It's a PDF. Okay? Layer will have some really interesting things about it. Okay, I'll show you that once we get there. And then insert we're going to use to bring in that title block drawing. All right, so we are going to go into paper space. Okay? Now, you could do that if you just clicked on one of those tabs. You could do that right now. Don't do that. But if I click on layout 1 or layout 2, it'll automatically take me to paper space. But there's a couple things about it I want to show you. So take your cursor into the graphics area and right click. And we are going to go to options. Okay? And it'll pull up the options dialog box. I think we've been here before. We just haven't looked at it a lot. Okay, so navigate to the display tab. Okay, so you got tabs up here. You might be on one of these. Click on the display tab. All right. At the lower left-hand corner of that, you'll see an area that says layout elements. Everybody finding that down in that corner? So notice most of those toggles are turned on. Display layout and model tabs. We want that to be toggled on because we want to be able to use those tabs down below here, okay? You turn that off, you won't have those tabs. Display printable area. If you use the same printer every time, that makes sense, but I'm going to say let's turn that off, okay? Display paper background. Again, I don't normally care about where my paper background is, so I'm going to turn that off. What you definitely don't want to have on is create a viewport and new layouts, because what it'll do is it'll create a layout or a viewport object for you, and you don't want that. Okay, so I'm going to say toggle everything off in this layout elements except for that one that says display, layout, and model tabs. So you guys that are working at home, listen to me. Anybody that's going to be working on AutoCAD at home, when you do this at home, those toggles are all going to be turned on, and your picture's not going to look like what we're going to see. Okay? So if it doesn't, you just have to go to options and turn it off. Okay? Because once you turn it off, it'll stay off. Okay? All right, so we're going to OK that. So we're now going to go either to Layout tab 1 or Layout tab 2. Doesn't matter. You should see a completely blank white screen like mine. Does anybody see something other than that? You clicked on it before you were supposed to. So you've got a viewport there. Just click on the viewport. On the viewport. And hit the delete key. Anybody else? You need to go to the layout tab. There you go. Oh, okay. You go to the layout tab. What you're basically looking at is a sheet of paper. And this represents the sheet of paper that's going to be coming out of the printer. Okay? Now, what we have are 2 dimensions. This is the paper world, and it's 2-dimensional only. Okay? Notice the UCS icon over here. It doesn't look like our normal UCS icon. See that? That tells you when you're in the paper world. Any 3D command you would try to use, it would tell you that's not valid. Okay? What we have to do is we have to rip a hole in our paper so we can see in the model space. So it's kind of like, I want to see out that window over there. I punch a hole through the wall and I can see outside. All right? So the hole we're going to punch through is called a viewport. And the viewports, usually you just kind of pick them where you want them. I have really valid coordinates for you. You go to the second sheet of my handout, the second sheet of the stapled handout. You'll see it's kind of hard to read, but I have coordinates there, lower left, upper right. Okay, so I'm going to create 3 viewports. Now, the viewports we just looked at before are really just screens. Okay, they're separate screens. The viewports we're going to create in Paperspace is actually an object. So it's just like a circle or a line or any other object in AutoCAD. You can draw it, you can move it, you can copy it, you can erase it, you can put it on its own layer. Okay? All right, so what we want to do when we handle viewports, we want to create a layer for viewports, because that way you can handle what's going on with them. So I'm going to go up here to the layer properties. We're going to create a new layer. We're going to call this layer viewports. You can call it anything you want. I usually call it viewports. I also like to make the color of the viewport layer something outrageous, so I usually use magenta. Okay? So create a viewports layer, make it magenta, make it current. So when you get done, it should say viewports up here, and it should show you the color that it's going to use. If you don't follow this, you're going to get really lost. See this little arrow? Hit it a couple times, and then the other one. Hit it a couple times. What's it? There you go. You're really going to be lost if you don't follow this, okay? Okay?
Sorry, can you put that again? The last four?
What, how to create a layer?
Oh,
Yeah, just go to a layer, create a layer, set the color, and then making current, okay? So when you get done, it should say viewports up here. I'll show you that. Let me know when you're ready. Everybody else okay? You guys good? Kyle? Cole, rather? Right, Cole?
Good, but I have a grid on my.
Okay, we'll get there. Oh, you had that from originally?
Yeah, I guess.
So you went in there before. Okay. Oh, I think you just got your. Oh yeah, you got a report. Okay. Okay. Just around that grid. Okay. Oh, you know what? That's probably okay. You did something. You created a report. Okay. Before you were supposed to. Okay. Okay. Got it? We're good?
Yeah, but mine's not saying default. It's just saying layer four.
That's okay. That's all right. You just didn't name it. That's all.
Okay.
When you create it, it asks you if you want to give it a name, and you just click. That's fine. Layer 4 is good as long as you know what it is. Okay. All right. So we're going to create objects. So we're going to create. Basically, they look like rectangles. Okay. So the command we're going to use is called mview. Mview. So you just type in mview. I think actually you can just type in mv, but let's go with mview. And then hit enter. So this guy has a bunch of sub options, and we'll take a look at these sub options here in a minute. But at the bottom, you notice it's on, off, fit, shade, lock, new, lots of different options. But basically it says specify your corner. So I've given you a lower left corner of 0.1, comma 0.1. So you can just type in 0.1, comma 0.1 and hit enter. And notice then it's like a rectangle. So the upper corner on that, I think that's 8. Hold on a minute. It's hard to read. Is it 5? Okay, thank you. 5, comma 745. All right, so you should now see your object inside of the viewport. You should see the viewport too, and notice the viewport should be whatever color your layer is. So this is an object, just like any other object. You guys getting that to work? Who doesn't have that working yet? You guys okay? David? Did you create a layer up here? All right, maybe we'll uninstall him. Making current. Making current. Click on it. Okay, you made it current. All right, now go into the mview command. Mview. 10, 10. I'm sorry, 0.1, 0.1. Okay. Do it again. Mview. 0.1, 0.1. 0.1, 0.1. don't need this. And then it's 5,745. You getting yours now? That's good. All right. So you should see your object. Okay. Is everybody seeing that now? Now, if you notice, if I try to select that object, it won't let me because that object is in a different dimension. Okay? It's kind of like you're looking through a pane of glass and the object is behind the glass. Now, the object that's actually active is the viewport itself. So notice, you guys don't do this, but notice if I click on that viewport, I can edit him. I can make him bigger. I can make him smaller. I can move him. I can do all kinds of cool stuff with that. Okay? So we're not going to do that. We're going to leave that alone. All right, is everybody good with that? I'm going to do something here real quick. You guys don't pay attention to me. I'm going to just delete that. Also notice that when your viewport brought your object view in, it zooms it in at what we call zoom extents. Okay, zoomed it in. Everybody see that? So now, if you want to touch your object, all you need to do is take your cursor and double click it inside your viewport. What space are you in now? Somebody tell me? You're now in model space. Okay. You can tell that if you look at the UCS icon. The UCS icon is showing you your model UCS icon. Notice your model's now active. See? But if I try to come out here and select my viewport, it won't let me because my viewport is actually sitting in model paper space. So to get out of this guy, I just double click outside. Double click inside, I'm in model space. Double click outside, back to paper. Okay? Pretty cool? All right. So now what we're going to do is create another viewport. And so there's that top viewport, top right. We're going to use the coordinates there, 4.1, or 5.1, 4.1, 8.25, 745. So we're going to go into the mview command again. And we're going to just type in those coordinates. 5.1, 4.1. Enter. And then we're going to take that to 8.25, 7.45, and hit enter. And there's my second viewport. Notice that my object is now zoomed in at zoomed extents. Okay? Is that working? Well, let's see what happens. You might have zoomed in. Yeah, you might have zoomed in. That's okay. We can zoom in. We're going to zoom them anyway. So I think maybe when you created that first one, you went inside and zoomed it a little bit. It's only when it creates it, it comes in and zooms it. So we got one more we're going to deal with. Let's go down below, and you got that 5.1, 1.1 rather, to 8.25, 4. So we're going to go back into the mview command. 5.1, 5.1, 0.1, and then we're going to have 8.25, 4. Okay. So most people, when they create viewports, they don't use coordinates. They just eyeball them. Okay. The only reason I'm doing it is so that it fits and it'll work with everything we got going on here. Okay. That's why I'm doing it that way specifically. Okay. Is everybody with me? So let's do this real quick. Click on your model tab. You should just see your model. See any viewports? Viewports don't exist, do they? Because they're in a different dimension. So what happens in the model stays in the model. What happens in paper stays in paper. And they can't cross. All right? They can't cross. Now, there is a way to do what's called change space. So you can go into model space and change the space into paper space and vice versa. Okay. All right, so let's go back to layout. Okay, so we've noticed now those viewports are significantly different than the first viewports I showed you. Okay. When AutoCAD created these the very first time in release 12, they called these floating model space viewports. And that kind of makes sense to me because I can move them around. Okay. They're also non-tiled, which means they can be irregularly shaped. Well, I'm going to show you something here. Watch. You guys don't need to do this, but I can go in and create a really outrageous polyline like this. And then go into InView and turn that. I can turn that into a viewport. You notice what I just did? So it's impossible for me to do that with tiled viewports. And you might think, well, why would I want to do something like that? And there are reasons, okay? I do irregular shaped viewports a lot, okay? So that's pretty critical. One thing that's also kind of important with viewports, try never get a viewport totally inside of another viewport because that can be a real mess. So if I create a little viewport inside of this viewport, that can be a real problem. Okay? All right, is everybody with me? All right, so let's go to the next page and we're going to take a look at zooming. So zooming is how we handle scale factor. Because now what's going to happen in paper space, we're going to plot everything from paper space, we're going to plot it 1-to-1. We never have to worry about scale factors, but we do have to worry about the scale factor within the viewport. Okay? So you'll notice this big viewport, I'm telling you, the scale factor is 1 XP. It's hard to read. That should be 1 XP. Okay? So 1 XP is the same thing as full scale. All right, so I'm going to do a zoom extents and so I can see my whole viewports. All right, so you have to go inside the viewport to do the zoom. So you double click inside the viewport. All right, everybody there? So right now there's a scale factor, and you might notice at the bottom of the screen, there is this little thing, and mine says 1.665566. That's the zoom scale factor. It's right down here at the bottom. You can sometimes find the zoom scale if you open that up. Do you notice there's a 1-to-1 setting in there? All right, so you can set that by clicking on that 1-to-1, and you'll notice that object's going to get a little bit smaller. And it's exactly zoomed now at 1-to-1. All right, you see that? Now take your cursor down here and hit that mouse wheel. Oh shit, what did I just do? Pardon my French. What did I just do? I screwed the zoom scale factor up, right? So you got to be careful. At one time, they had no way to lock these things down. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to fix this. Go into zoom and then hit E for extents. So I'm filling it exactly in the middle. And then I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to hit 1-to-1. Okay, so it took AutoCAD programmers a while to do this because all your viewports were just random. And if you hit the zoom scale factor or you change your mouse, you screwed the scale factor up. And sometimes it wasn't obvious. Well, now they have a way you can lock them. So what you lock is the viewport so that it cannot zoom and it cannot pan. Okay, so there's about 5 different ways to lock a viewport. So here's going to be one way. Here's the best way. Do you notice this little lock down here in the bottom? Do you see that little lock? If you click on that little lock, bam, he'll shut lock. Now, if you try to zoom in this viewport, notice it will not change scale factor. He's locked up. That's great. That's what we want to see. If I come over to this viewport, that one's not locked. That one's locked. Okay? So the process is this. once you get your model to the scale factor that you wanted in the viewport, you lock it, okay? So if you need to change things, you can always unlock it, but, you know, lock it so that you don't screw up scale factors, because that's a really common mistake. Okay, I said there's about 5 ways to do it. All right, so that little lock is the best. Here's another way. If you go to the mview command, mview, type in mview, you'll notice down at the bottom there is a lock option. So you can select the lock option. You can tell it, do you want it locked on or off? If I want it on, I click on, and then you select the viewport or viewports that you want to lock, and that'll lock them. Okay, so that's the second way. Okay, the third way is this. Take a viewport and left click the viewport. Right click, and there's a shortcut there that says display locked. In this case, it says yes. If you want to unlock it, you would hit no. If you want to lock it, you hit yes. Okay? You guys figuring that one out? You seen that one? Yes? No? No? Are you clicking on the viewport? Right click then. And then you get a shortcut. Right, yeah, display lock. Display, yeah, that's it. No, I don't think. Hold on. Click on the viewport again. I'll just click on one viewport. No, not in it. Not in it. On it. Get out of it. Double click outside. Double click. All right, now get a viewport. Right click. You see display viewport. All right, there you go. Okay? So, you got the little lock at the bottom, that's the best, the easiest. But you have to be inside the viewport for that to work. If you're outside of the viewport, you can use mview. You can also left click the viewport. You can also go to what's called properties. I think I showed you properties the other day. But if you click on this, right click, go to properties, and notice down here in the properties, one of the options will be whether it's locked or not. Let me see, I can't find it there. There it is, display locked, yes, no, okay? So there's a bunch of different ways to lock them, okay? My favorite is that little lock, because that works like a champ. Okay? Quick, it's easy, right? Okay, so we got one viewport locked at the scale factor that we want. So we're going to come into this other viewport right here, this top one. And what am I showing you the scale factor is for that? 2xp. So 2xp means times paper space. So this would be a 2-to-1 ratio. Okay? Now, I want to show you a cool little thing here. What we want to do is zoom this from the center of the object that we're going to zoom out. So I'm going to use that top circle, okay? I'm going to use the top circle. So what I'm going to do is zoom. I'm going to go to zoom, O for object. Select that top little circle and then hit enter. And it'll fill it. It'll fill it in the viewport. But you notice it's not 2-to-1. Mine's 4 point something. All right, everybody see that? So let's see if we can find a 2-to-1 zoom scale factor. If we zip down here, is there 2-to-1? Right there, 2-to-1. So there's a 2-to-1 zoom scale. Okay? Now you could also type in the word zoom and type in 2xp. You can do either case. All right? That's why I gave you that sheet, because those are called XP scale factors times paper space. All right? Is that working? What do we want to do now? We got it zoomed where we want it. We want to lock it. So come down here, hit your little lock, and lock that guy up. Okay, so I'm going to hit my lock. Bam, locked it. Okay? So we're going to do one more zoom. We're going to zoom in this green circle. So we're going to come down here, and we are going to do a zoom object, select the circle, and then hit enter. So it's filled that viewport, put it right in the center, and then I'm going to zoom it in or out from there. What is the scale factor on this one? 1.5 XP. So that's really 1.5 to 1, right? Well, let's open up that little box and see if we find 1.5 to 1. Does anybody find 1.5 to 1 there? No, we don't. So, no big deal. We're going to type in the word zoom, and we're going to key it in. 1.5, and make sure you use the XP after it. If you just type in 1.5, it's going to be times the limits. We want it times the paper space viewport, essentially. Okay? So we want 1.5 XP, hit enter. That thing should just get a little bit smaller. Does it say 1.5 there now on your scale factor? It's down below. Doesn't it say that? Right? You see that? No, you didn't. Type in 1.5 XP. You don't not doing any of this. All right, well, go see. Go to Z enter, get in here. Z enter. A above for object. Select the blue object. So select the blue object. No, you're not selecting it. Select the blue object. Select the blue object. You got to be in the viewport. Escape. Escape. Double click inside. Escape. Escape. All right. Now do a Z enter. Go enter. Select the blue object. Select the blue object. Yes. Click on it. That's why it wouldn't let you select it. Now you come down here and do 2, 1. Menu object. You don't want to do this. You don't want to lock it until it's okay. So do the same thing with that one. Okay. All right. So everybody good? You getting there? All right. Now notice wherever you're working, if I try to, oh, I didn't lock that one. See, I screwed that one up. So I'm going to have to fix that one. So I'm going to do another zoom object. Select the object. And then follow that up with a zoom 1.5 XP. Once I get that set, I want to lock it. So you can tell when you're locked. If you come in here and you do your window like, or your mouse wheel, that won't zoom, and that object won't zoom. And that's what you want to see. Okay? Is everybody getting this to work now? This is really important right here because this is how you get your scale factors set right for plotting. Okay? This is how you get them set right. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at the last page. Well, actually on this page, I guess, well, let me see. Nope, not. Yeah, look at the last page. So you'll notice on the last page, I have a title lock here, but I also have objects that are turned off in certain layers, but they're still on in others. Okay? So one of the cool things you can do in paper space that you cannot do in model space is you can freeze a layer in one viewport, but thaw it in another. Let me say that again. You can freeze a viewport, or you can freeze objects in one layer or one viewport, but not in another. Okay, so if I come up here, let's do a zoom extents in paper space so that we're zoomed out like this, and make sure you're not in the model right now. Make sure you're just like this. Okay. All right, if we come up here and we do a freeze on layer 1, notice it freezes in every viewport, right? The red object is gone on the left viewport. The red object is gone in the top viewport. And if the red object was showing up in my bottom viewport, it's also gone, right? So that's exactly what was happening in the other viewports. That's not a good thing, right? Okay, so we're gonna thaw that guy, thaw him. So here's something that's really cool. Double click in this top viewport. Okay. We're gonna freeze layer 1 in this viewport, but it's gonna remain thawed over here. So you're gonna open up this guy and notice there's layer 1. There's 2 freezes there that you didn't have before. The first freeze is what they call a global freeze, or freeze in all viewports. The freeze next to it is what they call freeze in current viewport. So what this allows me to do is freeze it just in that viewport. So we're going to click that guy, and notice when I do that, it got rid of the red objects in this viewport, but they're still here and they're still down here. So this is the one big virtue between the fact that you can now zoom scale in at exact scales, and you can also freeze and thaw in viewports selectively. So I can have layer 1 frozen in one viewport and thawed in another. And that's exactly what I just did. We're going to go down to this bottom viewport, double click inside there, and I'm going to also freeze him. Now remember, make sure you're doing the freeze and viewport specific, or what I call a VP layer freeze, viewport layer freeze, and not a global freeze, okay? If you freeze it globally, it'll do it across the board. Now this only works when you're in paper space, right? So I want you to notice this thing. You have the on-off, you have the global freeze, and you have the freeze and viewport, right? Everybody see that? Go back to model space. You don't have that any longer. You just have on-off, freeze thaw, and lock, okay? So that little symbol is only available when you're in paper space, okay? So if I go back to paper space, there's that little symbol. Is everybody good? Okay, so we're just about there now. We're going to now bring in a title block. And this title block is going to represent, the title that we're utilizing for this project. Now, you're going to actually construct the title block that you see here, or something similar to this, okay? So I've just given you a little sample title block. Did everybody pop that title block out on their desktop? So you should have, if you go to your desktop, you should have this thing called titleblockdemo.pwg. If you don't have that, let's make sure we get that right, okay? Don't have it? Okay, so here's what you want to do. Go to week 6 in Blackboard. There should be this little guy called demo drawing, right? Right click on him, and it should say save link as, and then take it to the desktop, and then just hit save. Okay? So it should be out there then. Are you finding that? All right, let me know. Okay, good. So we're going to be creating a title block. That's what we're going to be doing in this next assignment that we're going to be getting into. Okay. So I just gave you a approximate title block, right? Not a real one. Okay, so what we're going to do is this. You can zoom out just a little bit. Make sure that you're on another layer. I would put, let's go ahead and we'll put it on the 0 layer for now. So just make sure the 0 layer is current. You don't want to bring your title block on your viewport layer, okay? Because we're actually going to freeze our viewport layer. We're not going to want to see that. Okay? We're not going to want to see it. So we are going to use a command called insert. It's kind of a strange little command, but if you just type in I and hit enter, it'll pop up this dialog box. A little bit hard to use. They made this a lot harder than it used to be. Go to the tab that says current drawing. Click on that current drawing tab. And at the top here by filters, you'll see 3 dots. Just click on the 3 dots, go to the desktop, and in there you should find your title block demo drawing. So just click on the title block demo and hit open. So it should then bring that over into that. Okay, everybody got that? You're good for now. Just go ahead and do this. I'll get you squared away. Double click on here. Let's get this going. Okay. I'll help you out when we get done. Insert. Insert. What's it doing? Okay, so I'm gonna watch me do this and then I'll come around and make sure everybody gets this to work. Okay, so first of all, make sure you got the 0 layer current. Under the current drawing tab, I think I didn't bring mine into the current. Let me do mine real quick. Under the current drawing tab, you should see that little guy showing up. Down below where it says insertion point, if that has a check on it, get rid of it. And then all you should have to do is right click up here and hit insert, and it should bring the title block in just like that. Yep. That looks good. That does look good. We're sure you're not doing this. Don't do it in model space, don't do it in paper space. You're in model space. Okay, now try it. Right click. There you go. Perfect. And then bring your model. That can be responsible. Open. Come in. Perfect. Okay. All right. Did you get an answer? Got it. Good. Okay. All right. So here's our total fixture now. Now, of course, you can close this box, by the way. We're going to be utilizing this box a little bit more later on, but this is just a real quick way of showing you how to use this. So this thing is now called a block. So what we were able to do is bring a drawing file into a drawing file using insert. So this is an external drawing file. It's now incorporated inside your drawing file. This is, if you click on it, you'll notice it's all one object. Everybody see that? So if you want to edit that, usually you can just explode it. Okay. But here's what we want to do. We don't really care about that right now. We're going to create a title block. That's going to be what we're going to be doing on the next assignment. So we'll see how paper space works. Go ahead and do a zoom extents. And we're going to plot this. We're not going to actually plot it, but I just want to show you a couple things here. If we go to the plotter command right now and select your printer in whatever room you're in. And this is a letter size paper, so we're going to do letter. For what to plot, I would probably do extents. If it asks you to fit the paper, toggle off fit paper, and it should say 1:1. I think it actually does 1:1 by default because it knows you're in paper space. But here's the thing, you always plot 1:1 from paper space, okay? Always 1:1. So if you preview this, you'll notice there's your picture. So what do you notice? Everything's there, including the viewports, right? Well, we really don't typically want to see viewports. You don't want to see those guys. So here's how we handle that, okay? Just go ahead and hit the escape key. Cancel out of here. So if you don't want to see your viewports, which I really don't want to see my viewport, what I can do is just freeze the layer that the viewports are on, So I got two ways of handling this. If I go up to the layer command, I can either freeze the layer of the viewport, or you can set that to what's called a no plot layer. Okay? So you can either freeze the viewport or set it no plot. So I like to see my viewport while I'm working, but I don't want it to plot. So what I typically do is set my viewport to no plot. And then I can come here, all right? Then when we plot, we go into the plotter now, grab the printer, ladder, extents, 1-to-1, center it, preview it. You'll notice your viewports are gone. Okay? So you really don't want somebody, you don't want another user to see your viewports because those are just kind of something that you use, right? Just something you use. And a couple of things about this process too. Usually you bring your title block in first, and then you create your viewports because you want your viewports to be inside your title block. All right. I kind of did it backwards, and it's just the way I did it to describe how to do it. Okay. All right. Everybody see that? No? Is that a no? Okay. So you don't have to frozen or turned off, but yeah, if you want to, that's perfect. Okay. Okay. All right. Did anybody notice there were two colors in the layer command now, where there wasn't before? Let's take a look at that. I want you to go up. I want you to go up to the layer properties manager here. Do you notice each layer has two colors, two line types, two line weights? It didn't have that before, did it? What this allows you to do is overwrite colors in a viewport. So in other words, an object that's blue in one viewport could be green in another. Or it could be center in one viewport and continuous in another. So you have the ability, besides freezing and thawing separately in viewports, you can set things up differently. So for instance, if I go into this viewport here, I can set it up so that that red layer in that viewport, I want it to be, let's say, blue. So what it did is it made it blue in this viewport, but it would still be red in the other ones if they were on. Okay. So you have even more flexibility if you want to deal with it. Okay. I don't normally do that, but I guess I could see where there are cases and occasions where you're going to want to do that. Okay. Now, this process that we're doing seems a little hard at first. It gets really simple after a while. You're going to get really used to it. The other thing is when we get into Inventor, Inventor does exactly the same thing we're doing here with model space and paper space. They don't call it that. And the beauty is when you get into Inventor, it just generates your viewports for you really quickly. But it's exactly the same thing we're doing here is what it'll do. Okay, so you got the same exact process. Okay, so paper space is going to be cool. It's going to be for plotting. And we got a handful of assignments left before we get into Inventor, and we're going to be utilizing paper space from now on. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? If you have some individually, I could float around. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording then, and then I'll work with you guys individually. And if there's any particular questions, we'll take a look at that. I'm not going to give you a new assignment today. We're going to get that next week.